It was a cold and rainy afternoon when the Millionaire family's struggle truly began to show. Inside the walls of their massive mansion, with its gleaming chandeliers and spotless floors, things weren't as perfect as they appeared on the outside. The family, despite having everything money could buy, had been quietly dealing with a problem no amount of wealth could fix: their twin children. The twins were like a storm, always causing chaos wherever they went. No one could manage them for long. The couple had hired several nannies, hoping that one of them would be able to tame the wild behavior of their children. But one by one, each nanny had quit in frustration, unable to handle the children's constant mischief. The twins, though still very young, had mastered the art of throwing tantrums and playing their parents against each other. The father, a successful entrepreneur, and the mother, a former model, loved their children deeply. They provided them with the best of everything: expensive toys, private tutors, and the finest clothes. Yet the more they gave, the more the twins seemed to want. They were spoiled, entitled, and used to getting their way. No matter how hard their parents tried to instill discipline, the twins would always find a way to get around it. One evening, after another nanny had stormed out, frustrated with the twins' behavior, the parents sat down to discuss their options. They were at a loss. They couldn't understand what they were doing wrong. Money and power had always solved their problems before, but this was different. They were tired, stressed, and the house felt heavier than ever. "I don't know what to do anymore," the mother said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "Every nanny we hire quits after a few weeks. The kids are out of control." Her husband sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I thought we were doing everything right. Private school, the best toys, vacations, but they're just getting worse." They sat in silence, both feeling defeated. The idea of hiring yet another nanny felt like a futile attempt, but they knew they needed help. That's when a friend, someone they trusted, suggested they try something different. "Why not hire someone a little less conventional?" their friend had suggested. "Someone who doesn't come from the traditional nanny background, but who's used to handling challenging situations." The suggestion was met with skepticism, but the parents were willing to try anything at this point. After discussing it further, they decided to hire a new maid. Someone who could also help around the house, but who would be expected to take on the challenging task of managing the twins. This maid was different. She wasn't hired through an agency, and she didn't have a long history of working with children. But what she did have was a calm and collected demeanor that intrigued the couple. Her name was quietly mentioned when she arrived for her first day. The family didn't know much about her except that she had a reputation for being patient and hard-working. She was hired on a trial basis, with the understanding that she would spend most of her time managing the housework and helping care for the children when needed. The first day she arrived, the twins immediately tested her. They were used to getting what they wanted, and they weren't about to let a new person come in and tell them what to do. They threw tantrums, ignored her instructions, and tried to get her to do things for them, hoping to see how far they could push. But she didn't react the way others had. She didn't raise her voice or threaten to call their parents. She didn't give in to their demands or try to appease them. Instead, she remained calm, steady, and quietly firm. At first, the twins didn't know what to make of her. She wasn't angry or upset, which made her different from anyone they'd encountered before, and she certainly wasn't scared of them. She treated them like normal children, giving them boundaries but also listening to them in a way that was unusual. She spoke to them like they were capable of understanding, not like they were just a nuisance to be dealt with. In those early days, the twins pushed even harder. They would refuse to eat, throw their toys around, or pretend to be sick to get attention, but the maid never flinched. She would calmly pick up the mess, quietly ask them to clean up, and explain why their behavior was unacceptable. She didn't try to bribe them with rewards or punish them with harsh words. Instead, she showed them respect, treating them like young people capable of learning and growing. The parents, of course, were still skeptical. They had seen the twins go through nannies like clockwork. Nothing had worked in the past, so they didn't expect this time to be any different. But there was something about the maid's calm presence that was different. She wasn't rattled by the twins' tantrums, and she didn't seem to be intimidated by their behavior. Over the course of the first few days, they started to notice something strange. For the first time, the twins seemed to be listening. They would still try to push her, but it wasn't the same. The maid didn't give them what they wanted, but she also didn't scold them. She made them work for it. She would give them simple tasks to do and would ask them to help clean up after themselves. At first, the twins resisted, but they were beginning to see that their behavior didn't faze her. She was a puzzle they couldn't figure out, and then something unexpected happened. The twins, who had been nothing but trouble, began to show small signs of respect. They began to help around the house without being asked, setting the table for dinner or picking up their toys without complaint. They began to listen when she spoke, and gradually the chaos in the house started to settle. It was subtle, but over the course of the next few weeks, the maid's influence started to make an impact. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't push too hard, but she was consistent. She treated the twins with kindness, firmness, and understanding. Instead of punishing them for bad behavior, she simply showed them the consequences of their actions in a way they could understand. The millionaire parents, still unsure, started to notice the shift. They saw the twins behaving better, being more cooperative, and even expressing gratitude. It wasn't immediate, but it was real. They began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this woman was the key to the change they had been searching for. The transformation was slow, but it was happening. As the weeks went on, the once chaotic household became quieter, more peaceful. The parents began to have more time to focus on their work, without the constant worry of their children causing trouble. But they still didn't fully understand what was happening. Could it really be this maid who was making the difference? The twins weren't perfect, they still had moments of mischief, of course. But with the maid's steady guidance, they were beginning to show signs of maturity. They no longer ran wild around the house or tested every boundary. Instead, they began to cooperate, and the maid's presence became something they relied on. The parents, still hesitant but slowly growing more confident, had to admit, this woman, this maid who had come into their lives without any special qualifications, was doing something the nannies hadn't been able to do. She wasn't just managing the children, she was helping them grow. It was only the beginning of the change, but it was a change the family had been waiting for. What would happen next was something no one could predict. But the maid had already proven one thing: sometimes, the right person with the right approach could make all the difference. As the weeks passed, the family noticed a subtle change in their home. The twins, who had once been a constant source of stress and frustration, began to show signs of improvement. At first, it was small things. The twins started making their beds without being told, setting the table without arguing, and even picking up their toys after playing. These were the kinds of things they had always resisted in the past, and yet, under the maid's guidance, they began to do them without hesitation. The millionaire couple was still cautious, unsure whether this was just another phase or if something real was happening. But day by day, they saw the children become more cooperative, more willing to listen, and more respectful of the boundaries that had been set. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was enough to make them sit up and take notice. The maid, whose name was simply known around the house but rarely spoken about, continued her work with a quiet determination. She didn't seem to mind the long hours or the challenge of working with the twins. In fact, she didn't seem to think of it as work at all. To her, it was about building trust, understanding, and connection, things the twins desperately needed. It wasn't just about keeping them in line. It was about showing them that they mattered, that their feelings were valid, and that their actions had consequences. The twins, for their part, were beginning to warm up to her. It wasn't that they suddenly adored her. They still tested her, still tried to push the limits. But the maid's calm demeanor, her ability to remain unfazed in the face of their antics, was something they hadn't encountered before. When they would scream or refuse to do what was asked of them, she wouldn't yell or react in anger. She would simply ask them to try again, or gently remind them of the rules. At first, the twins found this frustrating. They were used to the drama, the emotional reactions that came from their parents or the other nannies when they acted out. But with the maid, there was no drama. There was no shouting, no punishment. There was just a steady, consistent approach that slowly began to break through the walls they had built around themselves. One afternoon, after a particularly tough morning where the twins had caused chaos in the house, the maid decided to try a different approach. Instead of asking them to do chores or follow the usual rules, she sat down with them at the kitchen table. She didn't scold them for their behavior. Instead, she asked them to talk about what had happened. She asked them to explain why they had acted the way they had, what they were feeling, and if they understood how their actions affected others. At first, the twins were reluctant. They weren't used to being asked to explain their feelings. They were used to being told what to do, not being asked for their perspective. But the maid's gentle tone and patient demeanor made them feel heard, something they weren't accustomed to. Slowly, they started to open up, sharing that they were bored, frustrated, and sometimes even sad. The conversation wasn't easy. The twins didn't immediately understand the concept of empathy or the importance of considering others' feelings. But the maid didn't rush them. She took the time to explain things in a way they could grasp, reinforcing the idea that their feelings were valid but that their actions still had consequences. That evening, the millionaire parents noticed a difference in their children. The usual chaos at dinner time was replaced with a calm and cooperative atmosphere. The twins, for the first time in a long time, actually sat down and ate their dinner without throwing tantrums or arguing. The parents exchanged surprised glances. Was this really happening? Over the next few weeks, the maid continued her quiet work. She wasn't changing the children overnight, and she didn't expect to, but with each passing day, the twins' behavior improved. They were still challenging at times, still prone to throwing tantrums when they didn't get their way, but they were beginning to understand the value of listening, of taking responsibility for their actions, and of respecting others. The parents, still uncertain, began to test the maid's methods. They decided to take a more hands-off approach, allowing her to take the lead with the twins. This wasn't an easy decision for them. They had always been the ones in charge, the ones calling the shots. But they could see that the maid's approach was working in a way their previous methods hadn't. One afternoon, the parents returned home from a meeting to find the twins sitting quietly in the living room, reading books. This for them was nothing short of miraculous. Normally, the twins would be running around, making noise and causing a mess. But today they were calm, engaged in an activity on their own. Are they reading? The father asked, astonished. The maid, who had been preparing dinner in the kitchen, nodded. Yes, they've been reading for a little while now. They asked if they could start a new book. The mother blinked in disbelief. I never thought I'd see the day. The father smiled, shaking his head. Neither did I. It's like a completely different house. Over time, the parents started to recognize just how much the maid had done. It wasn't just that the twins were behaving better. It was that they were becoming more thoughtful, more considerate, and more willing to help. They began doing small things without being asked, like picking up their own plates after meals or helping set the table. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The millionaire parents found themselves with more free time than they had in months. They weren't constantly having to step in and manage the twins' behavior. They weren't having to discipline or argue over the simplest of tasks. For the first time in a long while, they were able to relax, to enjoy dinner without stress, to have conversations without the interruptions of a tantrum or argument. But even as the parents began to relax, they couldn't help but feel a little apprehensive. Could it really be this easy? Could the maid really be the one to turn everything around? They knew it was still early, and they didn't want to get their hopes up too soon. But every day it became harder to deny that things were changing for the better. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, the twins surprised everyone again. Instead of arguing over who would sit where or complaining about the food, they each took a moment to thank the maid for helping them. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was sincere. The twins, who had once been impossible to manage, were showing gratitude for the first time. The millionaire parents looked at each other, astonished. They had been so focused on their own struggles that they hadn't noticed the small victories along the way. But now, as they looked at their children, quietly eating their dinner, helping with small tasks and even expressing gratitude, they realized just how far they had come. The maid, who had been quietly overseeing everything from the kitchen, couldn't help but smile to herself. She knew that this was only the beginning. There was still work to be done, and the twins still had a long way to go. But she had seen enough to know that they were on the right path. They were learning, growing, and slowly but surely becoming the children they had always had the potential to be. And the millionaire parents, finally seeing the results of the maid's hard work, couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the future. Maybe, just maybe, this time things would be different. As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in the house continued to change. It wasn't dramatic. It was more of a slow and steady transformation that no one could ignore. The twins, once known for their wild and disruptive behavior, began to show signs of maturity that their parents had longed for. The mansion, which had once echoed with the sound of tantrums, was now quieter, more peaceful. There was still the occasional disagreement, but it was nothing like it had been before. The maid, though humble and unassuming, had become the heart of the household. Her method was simple. She didn't treat the twins like problems to be fixed, but as individuals to be understood. She didn't demand their obedience, but instead, she set clear boundaries and gave them room to learn and grow. She had done something that the millionaire parents hadn't been able to do. She had reached the twins in a way that no one else had. The twins, for their part, were still testing their boundaries, but the way they did it had changed. They no longer screamed or threw things when they didn't get their way. Instead, they would sulk for a few minutes and then quietly come to the maid to ask for guidance. They were learning to manage their own emotions, something that had never occurred to them before. One afternoon, after a long day of playing in the yard, the twins came inside to find their favorite game console missing. They both immediately panicked, thinking someone had taken it, but then they saw the maid sitting calmly in the living room reading a book. "Where's the game?" one of them asked, their voice filled with urgency. The maid didn't look up from her book. "It's been put away for the day," she said simply. "You've played for hours now. It's time to take a break." The twins were about to protest when they remembered how she always stayed calm and explained things to them without raising her voice. Instead of throwing a tantrum as they would have before, they stood there for a moment, trying to understand her logic. "But we were having fun," the other twin said quietly, now more curious than upset. The maid smiled gently. "Fun is important, but so is balance. It's important to take breaks, to spend time with each other, and to rest. Too much of one thing isn't good for anyone." The twins looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't a response they were used to, but it made sense. After a brief pause, they nodded in agreement, realizing they were a little tired from all the screen time anyway. They had never really thought about balance before. Later that day, after they had spent some time playing outside, they came inside to find a surprise. The maid had set up a small art station for them. There were paints, brushes, and a big sheet of paper. "Why don't you two try something new?" she suggested. "Create your own masterpiece." The twins, initially hesitant, eventually took to the activity. They painted together, laughing and discussing their ideas. For the first time in a long while, they were working together without fighting over whose turn it was or what color to use. The maid watched from a distance, knowing that this was another small step in helping them develop patience, teamwork, and creativity. The millionaire parents, who had been observing from the sidelines, couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had watched their children grow in ways they hadn't thought possible. The maid's approach was so simple yet so effective. She didn't push the twins too hard. She didn't try to control every aspect of their lives. She gave them the space they needed to make their own decisions and, in doing so, taught them how to think for themselves. The twins had started to develop a new sense of responsibility. They were cleaning up after themselves without being asked, helping set the table for dinner, and even doing their homework without constant reminders. The parents had been skeptical at first, wondering if this change was just temporary. But as the days went by, they saw that it wasn't just a phase. The twins were truly changing. One evening, the parents decided to test the maid's methods. They set up a dinner for some of their friends, a group of influential business partners who had been curious about the family's recent shift in dynamics. The twins had always been difficult at social gatherings, causing disruptions and making the evening uncomfortable for everyone. But this time things were different. The maid had prepared the twins in advance, explaining the importance of good behavior at the dinner table and the need to respect the guests. She didn't make them feel nervous or uncomfortable. Instead, she spoke to them as equals, reminding them of the social norms and encouraging them to enjoy the evening in their own way. When the guests arrived, the twins were well-behaved and polite. They greeted the guests, sat at the table without fuss, and even joined in on the conversation. The parents were amazed. They had never seen their children behave like this in front of guests. There was no arguing, no tantrums, just a calm and mature approach to the situation. As the evening went on, the parents couldn't stop glancing at the twins, astonished by how much they had changed. The maid's calm presence and gentle guidance had created an atmosphere in which the children could thrive. They weren't perfect, of course. There were still moments of mischief, but these were far fewer than they had been. The transformation was real, and it was happening in front of their eyes. After the guests left, the parents sat down with the twins in the living room. They were eager to express how proud they were of their behavior, but before they could say anything, the twins spoke up. "Thank you for helping us," one of them said quietly. Looking at the maid, the other twin nodded in agreement. "We had fun tonight. It was nice not to get in trouble." The parents were speechless for a moment. It was the first time the twins had ever expressed gratitude for the effort the maid had put in. The parents realized that the maid had done more than just manage their children. She had taught them something valuable: self-control, respect, and responsibility. The maid smiled softly, looking at the twins. "I'm proud of you both," she said. "You did a great job tonight. You're learning. And that's the most important thing." The millionaire parents sat in awe, unable to believe the transformation they were witnessing. This was the family they had always wanted to be: calm, respectful, and together. They had tried for years to get their children to behave, but it was the maid who had finally unlocked the key to their success. But as much as the parents appreciated the change, they still couldn't fully understand it. What made this maid so different? What was it about her approach that had worked where others had failed? It was clear that she had a gift, but it wasn't just about what she did. It was about who she was. She had a unique way of seeing the world, of understanding people, and of connecting with the twins on a level that no one else had been able to reach. And so, as the weeks went by, the parents continued to watch, amazed at the progress their children were making. They had been skeptical at first, unsure if the maid would be able to handle their difficult twins. But now they couldn't imagine their lives without her. She had become an essential part of their family, someone they trusted and relied on. As for the twins, they were still growing, still learning. But they were no longer the uncontrollable, spoiled children they had once been. They had learned important lessons, not just about good behavior, but about empathy, kindness, and respect. And much of that was thanks to the maid, who had done the impossible. She had turned their lives around. As the days went on, it became more and more apparent that the changes in the twins were not just a fleeting moment. They were real, lasting, and steadily growing. The parents, who had once been filled with doubt, now watched in awe as their children blossomed under the maid's steady influence. No one had expected this. No one had imagined that someone without a conventional background in childcare would be the key to unlocking the potential in their children. The twins, still young and often mischievous, were slowly but surely learning how to balance their emotions and actions. They were no longer the unruly, spoiled children they had been. Of course, they still had their moments, but there was a noticeable difference. They were starting to make better choices, and more importantly, they were becoming more self-aware. The transformation was slow, but it was happening right before the parents' eyes. One afternoon, after finishing their homework without being asked, the twins approached the maid with something in their hands. It was a simple drawing, but it meant the world to them. It was a picture of their family, with the maid included at the center. The twins had drawn themselves, their parents, and the maid, all smiling together. "This is for you," one of them said, holding the drawing out to her. The maid smiled warmly, her eyes softening as she looked at the picture. "Thank you. This is beautiful," she said. "I'm so proud of both of you." The twins beamed with pride. It wasn't a grand gesture, but for them it was a huge step. They were starting to understand what it meant to express their feelings and appreciate the people who cared for them. They had never done something like this before, and it was a sign that they were beginning to understand the value of kindness and gratitude. Meanwhile, the parents, observing from the other room, exchanged knowing looks. They had seen the twins go from chaos to calm, from tantrums to cooperation. But now they were seeing something deeper. The children were starting to develop a genuine connection with the maid. She had become more than just someone who managed their behavior. She had become a role model, a guide, and in many ways a part of their family. That evening, as the family sat down for dinner, the mood was different. The twins were calm, their usual energy replaced by a sense of quiet confidence. They helped set the table without being asked, and when the meal was served, they even made sure their parents had everything they needed before helping themselves. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. As they ate, the parents shared glances, trying to process what had happened. They had always known their children had the potential to be kind, respectful, and responsible, but it had always seemed so out of reach. Now they were seeing that potential come to life in front of them. The twins were no longer just the wild, unruly kids they had once been. They were becoming thoughtful, considerate individuals. The maid, sitting quietly at the table with them, couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had been working with the twins for months now, but it wasn't just about the visible changes in their behavior. She knew that what mattered most was the quiet growth that was happening inside them. They were starting to see the world around them with more empathy, to understand their own emotions and to take responsibility for their actions. After dinner, as the family relaxed in the living room, the maid pulled the twins aside for a short conversation. She had noticed something in their behavior that she wanted to address. It wasn't a major issue, but it was something worth discussing. "You two did a great job at dinner tonight," she began, "but there's something I want to remind you of. You both have a lot of influence on each other. When one of you acts out or makes a poor decision, it affects the other. You're a team and you need to support each other." The twins nodded, their faces serious. They had heard these words before, but this time it felt different. This time they understood. They had learned about teamwork in school, but the maid had shown them what it meant in real life. She had made them realize that their actions had an impact not only on themselves but also on those around them. Later that night, after the twins had gone to bed, the parents sat in the living room, talking quietly about the evening's events. They were amazed at how far their children had come. They had never imagined this level of change was possible. It had taken time, patience, and understanding, but it had worked. The maid had shown them what it meant to be a calm, steady presence in the midst of chaos. She had shown them the power of consistency and the importance of leading by example. "I don't know how she does it," the father said, his voice full of admiration. "I honestly didn't think this would work. I thought the twins would push her away, just like they did with everyone else." The mother nodded in agreement. "I know. I thought she'd last a week, maybe 2, and then we'd be back to square one. But she's really made a difference. She's taught them things we couldn't." The father paused, deep in thought. "It's not just that she's teaching them. It's how she's teaching them. She doesn't treat them like problems to be fixed. She treats them like they're capable of learning, like they're capable of change." The mother smiled softly, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You're right. She's not just managing them. She's helping them grow. And in the process, she's helping us grow too." As the weeks continued to pass, the twins' transformation became even more evident. They were still full of energy, still playful, but there was a new sense of maturity in their actions. They were no longer the center of chaos in the house. Instead, they were becoming active participants in the family dynamic. They helped with chores, showed more respect to their parents, and even started to show genuine interest in things outside of their own world. Things like volunteering to help the maid with simple tasks, or asking their parents about the work they did. The maid, for her part, continued to guide them with the same quiet, steady approach. She didn't try to change them overnight. She didn't expect them to be perfect. Instead, she helped them build habits, reinforced positive behavior, and encouraged them when they made mistakes. She taught them that making mistakes was part of growing up, and that learning from those mistakes was what truly mattered. The parents, now more confident in their children's progress, started to give them more independence. They let them make more decisions on their own, trusting that the foundation of responsibility and respect the maid had helped them build would continue to guide them. The twins, eager to prove that they had truly changed, began to take on more responsibility. They organized their own rooms, managed their time better, and even began helping other children in their neighborhood with their homework. It was clear that the changes in the twins weren't just about good behavior. They were about a shift in mindset. The twins were starting to see the world differently, not just as a place where they could get what they wanted, but as a place where their actions had consequences. They were learning empathy, responsibility, and the importance of self-discipline. And while there was still a long way to go, the progress they had made was undeniable. The parents, reflecting on how far they had come, couldn't help but feel immense gratitude. They had spent so many years struggling, trying to fix problems with quick solutions, but now they realized that the key had been right in front of them all along. The maid had shown them that change wasn't about forcing their children to behave. It was about guiding them with patience, consistency, and love. And as they looked around their home, they couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The house was no longer a place of constant tension and conflict. It had become a place of growth, understanding, and mutual respect. And much of that was thanks to the woman who had quietly and patiently made the impossible seem possible. As the weeks continued to pass, the changes in the twins became even more apparent. The behavior that once drove their parents to exhaustion was now almost a distant memory. The twins had gone from constantly defying their parents and caretakers to being respectful, thoughtful, and even caring in ways they had never been before. It was remarkable how a few months of steady guidance could transform their outlook on life. The maid, who had been at the center of this transformation, continued her quiet, steady work. She never demanded recognition, never sought praise for her efforts. She simply did her job knowing that the small changes were just the beginning. She saw potential in the twins that others hadn't, and she was determined to help them unlock it, even if it meant taking things one small step at a time. One afternoon, the twins came home from school holding something special in their hands. They had both been working on a project for weeks, a project they were excited to share with their parents. When they walked through the door, they were practically glowing with pride. "Mom, Dad," one of the twins said, practically jumping up and down. "We finished it. We want to show you." The parents looked up in surprise. They had been used to their children coming home with projects that often ended in frustration, fights, and half-finished attempts. But this was different. This time the twins were genuinely excited, eager to show off something they had worked hard on. The maid, standing nearby, gave the parents a knowing look. She knew this moment was a milestone. The twins weren't just excited to show their parents, they were proud of themselves. They had completed something on their own, without relying on anyone else to do the work for them. The twins proudly presented their project, a large, colorful poster filled with drawings, notes, and facts about the environment. It was clear that they had put a lot of effort into it, and the parents couldn't help but smile as they looked at the finished product. "This is amazing," the father exclaimed, clearly impressed. "You two did this all by yourselves?" The twins nodded, their faces lighting up with joy. "We worked really hard on it," one of them said. "We wanted to learn more about how to take care of the earth." The parents were speechless for a moment. Not only had the twins completed a project with no prompting, but they had chosen a subject that was important and meaningful. It wasn't something they had been forced into. It was something they had chosen for themselves. The maid, quietly watching from the background, couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had been there to guide them, but the work they had put into the project was their own. Over the following weeks, the twins continued to surprise their parents with their maturity and responsibility. They were no longer the same children who had been impossible to manage. Now they were making decisions for themselves, taking on challenges, and even helping out around the house without being asked. They began setting goals for themselves, working hard to accomplish them, and even celebrating their successes as a family. The maid, who had been the steady presence in their lives, was now beginning to step back. She had done her part, helping them build a foundation of responsibility, respect, and empathy. She knew that the twins were now on a path of their own, and while they still had more to learn, she felt confident that they were ready to face the world. Her job had never been about making their lives perfect. It had always been about helping them understand what it meant to grow and change. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the twins did something that brought tears to their parents' eyes. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a moment that spoke volumes about how far they had come. "We want to thank you," one of the twins said, looking up from their plate. "You've both done so much for us. You helped us when we were acting out, and you didn't give up on us. We're really lucky to have you." The other twin nodded, adding, "And we want to thank you too for always being there for us, even when we didn't deserve it." The parents were stunned. It wasn't that the twins had never shown affection before, but this was different. They weren't just saying they loved them. They were expressing gratitude for the guidance and support they had received. It was a moment of reflection, and it showed how much the twins had grown in such a short amount of time. The maid, overhearing the conversation from the kitchen, smiled softly to herself. She didn't need any words of thanks. She had done her job, and the results spoke for themselves. It wasn't about receiving praise. It was about helping the twins learn the value of gratitude and self-awareness. That evening, as the family sat together, she knew that her time with them was drawing to a close. The next day, the parents sat down with the maid to have a conversation. They knew that they had relied heavily on her over the past few months, and they were deeply grateful for everything she had done. But now they felt it was time to give the twins the space to continue growing on their own. "You've done more for our children than we could have ever hoped for," the father said. "We can't thank you enough for everything you've taught them," the mother added. "You've changed our family. You've helped us see our children in a new light. You've given them a chance to grow into the people they were meant to be." The maid smiled, her eyes warm with pride. "You've always had the potential to be this family. I just helped guide you, but the work was always yours." The parents nodded, knowing that the maid was right. They had done the hard work. They had just needed the right support to help them through it, and the maid had given them exactly what they needed. As the days passed, the twins continued to thrive. They no longer needed constant supervision or reminders. They were making decisions on their own, working together as a team and showing respect to the people around them. They had become the children their parents had always hoped for, and the parents couldn't help but feel immense pride. The maid, though, knew that her work was finished. She had helped them reach a point where they could stand on their own. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about knowing how to handle the challenges that life threw their way. The twins had learned that lesson, and now it was time for her to move on. But as she prepared to leave, the family came together to thank her one last time. They knew that they owed so much of their happiness and success to her quiet, steady presence in their lives. She had done the impossible. She had shown them that with patience, love, and guidance anyone could change. And as the maid left their home for the last time, the family stood at the door, watching her go. They were no longer the family they had once been. They were a family that had learned how to grow, how to love, and how to respect one another. And they knew that no matter where life took them, they would always carry the lessons she had taught them with them. Weeks passed, and the household was quieter, more peaceful than it had ever been before. The twins were thriving, the parents were more relaxed, and the once chaotic home was now a place where everyone seemed to have a rhythm. It had taken months of hard work, patience, and commitment, but the family had come a long way. The maid, who had played such an integral role in this transformation, was no longer a daily presence in the home. Yet the lessons she had imparted lingered, guiding every interaction and every decision the family made. The twins, who had once been unruly and challenging, were now becoming responsible young people, eager to contribute and help in the household. Their parents, too, had grown. They had learned the importance of patience and consistency, and how essential it was to set a positive example for their children. They were no longer the stressed-out parents who had once feared their children's outbursts and tantrums. They had become confident in their ability to guide their children through life's challenges, no longer relying on external help. One evening, as the family sat down to dinner, a rare moment of reflection filled the air. The meal was simple, but it felt like a celebration. The twins were quiet, focused on their food, but their parents noticed how differently they acted now compared to before. There was a calmness to the twins that hadn't been there before. They sat up straight. They didn't interrupt each other, and they took turns speaking. Even when the conversation moved to school and what they wanted to do when they grew up, the twins shared their dreams thoughtfully, with a sense of purpose and ambition. "I want to be a scientist," one of the twins announced, pushing their plate away. "I want to learn how we can make the world a better place." The other twin smiled and nodded. "I want to build things like bridges or even houses so people have a place to live." The parents looked at each other, surprised. These were dreams they had never heard the twins express before. It wasn't that the twins hadn't talked about their future in the past, but it had always been vague with no real sense of direction. Now, though, the twins were talking about their futures with clear intent. "That's amazing," the mother said, smiling warmly. "You both have such big dreams. We're so proud of you." The father nodded in agreement, his voice soft. "We've always known you could do great things. You just needed the chance to show us what you're capable of." The twins exchanged a glance, and for the first time in a long while, there was no tension between them. They didn't argue about who was going to be the most successful or who had the better idea. Instead, they were just happy for each other, supporting each other's goals. After dinner, the parents couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for how far they had come. They sat down in the living room talking quietly. The house, which had once been filled with shouting and stress, was now peaceful. The work wasn't over, of course. The twins still had much to learn, and there would be bumps in the road. but they had reached a point where the foundation for a positive future had been firmly set. It was clear that the twins had been changed for the better, and that change wasn't something that would simply vanish. The parents had watched their children transform from the inside out. It wasn't just their behavior that had changed. It was their mindset. The maid had taught them important lessons about empathy, responsibility, and self-awareness. She had shown them that it wasn't just about making good decisions. It was about understanding why those decisions mattered. She had opened their eyes to the world around them and helped them see that their actions had consequences. Not just for themselves, but for others as well. One morning, as the family was enjoying a lazy weekend breakfast, the mother looked over at her children, a soft smile on her face. She had never imagined this day would come, the day when she could sit at the table with her children, knowing that they were growing into the people they were meant to be. They were no longer a source of constant stress. They were her pride and joy. She knew that their future was bright and she couldn't wait to see what they would accomplish. "I've been thinking," the father said, breaking the silence. "You two have been doing so well lately. I think it's time we start getting you involved in some bigger projects, something that will challenge you." The twins looked at each other, curious. "What do you mean?" one of them asked. "Well," the father continued, "I think it's time we take on a new family project. Something meaningful, like maybe a community service initiative. We could help others, and in the process you'll learn even more about responsibility and the world around you." The twins' eyes lit up. They were excited about the idea of giving back and making a difference. It was a natural next step in their journey of growth, and it showed just how much they had matured. "That sounds amazing," one of the twins said, eager to start. "We want to help." The other twin agreed. "We can use our ideas for the future to help other people." The parents smiled. It was clear that their children had come a long way. They had grown from two children who constantly sought attention and mischief into two thoughtful, responsible individuals who were ready to make a positive impact on the world. This was more than they had ever hoped for. Over the next few weeks, the family began working together on their new project. They reached out to local organizations and started planning ways to help people in need. The twins were excited about the opportunity to contribute, and their enthusiasm was contagious. They didn't just want to be a part of the project, they wanted to take the lead. As they worked together, the family grew even closer. The twins, who had once fought for attention, were now working as a team, supporting each other in ways that felt natural. They had learned the value of collaboration, of working together to achieve a common goal. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments of frustration, but the family knew that this was another step in the right direction. One afternoon, after a particularly successful day of volunteering, the twins sat down with their parents. They were tired but happy, and the sense of accomplishment was written all over their faces. "We did something good today," one of the twins said. "It feels really nice to help other people." The other twin nodded. "Yeah, it makes me want to do more. We can make a real difference." The parents smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. Their children had come so far. It was no longer just about managing their behavior. It was about seeing them grow into compassionate, responsible individuals who cared about the world beyond their own needs. As the months passed, the family continued to grow together. The twins became more and more involved in their community service work, and their parents encouraged them every step of the way. The maid, though no longer in the household, had left an indelible mark on the family. Her lessons had been simple, but they had taken root in the hearts of the children, and now they were flourishing. The journey had been long, and there were still challenges ahead. But the family was stronger now, more united than ever before. The twins had learned to be responsible, thoughtful, and kind. They were no longer the children who caused chaos and disruption. They had become young people who were eager to make the world a better place. As they continued their journey, the family knew that they had the tools they needed to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had learned that change didn't happen overnight, but with patience, hard work, and a little guidance, anything was possible. And in the end, it was the small moments, the quiet conversations, the lessons learned, and the love shared that had made all the difference.